Hey, what's going on, everyone? Got the red rocket back in the shop for some more work. This time we're doing some upgrades, hoping that we can make it a little bit more of a rocket. So what we're doing today is we're installing a ported and polished lower intake manifold. This is one that I've ported myself. I didn't go too extreme on it. Just cleaned up the runners a little bit here, just on the entrances. Ports. Then on the head side here, I've just cleaned up around the injector. That's pretty much it. So let's get started tearing this thing apart. Alright, first you want to disconnect the battery, and basically removing the plenum is the same as in my 3400 plenum removal video. Just check that out if you need to know any more details on removing the plenum. And yeah, we'll get started. Alright, now that we have the plenum off, I gotta get this cruise control out of the way. So plug that. Set that up here. It's out of the way. Need that out of the way so I get the power steering pump bolts. Then the belt also has to be undone. So I need a ratchet, a long ratchet or a belt tool to get at the tensioner and get this belt off. Now I need to remove the fuel rail and then drain the coolant. Alright, if you look back in here, there is a drain for the rad right here. It's just like a quarter drive ratchet, or a quarter drive extension on a ratchet. And it's just like a normal counterclockwise to loosen it. Sometimes these do strip and the gaskets go bad, so it's always a good idea to have a new one close by. So I'm unsure of that one. I've never had to have that one apart, so I'm going to just pull the rad hose off. So the only reason I'm loosening the rad hose here instead of just putting a new drain cock in the rad, it's because it's after hours and the parts stores are closed right now, so I can't be tying up a hoist for tomorrow morning. Alright, so now I need to remove the fuel rail. Then I need to drain the coolant so I can get these tubes off to get at the valve covers. Just a little bit of penetrating fluid to loosen up the lower O-rings for the injectors. They've been on there for a long time, so they're a little tight. You don't want to pull too hard on them, because these clips do let go, and then you'll get fuel all over the place. If you feel that you might have a little issue, it's always a good idea to pull the cap off and drain the fuel out before starting this process. Under the cap there's just a Schrader valve, This is where you would test your fuel pressure. You just basically, it's like a tire valve, you just poke it in with a little screwdriver and then that lets the fuel out. There is one more bolt down the back here, at the back of the head, that needs to be loosened for the rail to come loose there. It's a little 13mm nut. Okay, so there's also another nut here for one of the heater hoses. You have to loosen that up. It's just on a hook, holds this in. Okay, so this fitting here, this coolant fitting has a O-ring in the bottom here, and it's been in there a long time, so it's a little tight. A little corroded. So the nut for the fuel line has to come off all the way. It's just like an eyelet that it's on. The only reason why I'm leaving the injectors and everything in and not undoing the fuel rail, to undo the fuel rail you gotta undo basically the regulator line here and this nut for the feed line. They're usually pretty tight. I don't want to have any issues with leaking after. And the main connect lines for the flex hoses for the fuel lines are down at the firewall, pretty much below the brake booster, and they're usually pretty rusty. So we're just going to tie this out of the way. That'll give us enough room to get at the lower plenum and everything else. Okay, so now I gotta get the stud off at the back from the coil packs. It's a 5.5mm. Just have to be careful. A lot of times they like to break off. Just need to do the one. It's in the way of one of the bolts for the valve cover. Alright, now I need to get at these lower intake bolts. These ones are always a pain to get because they're right below the runner. So you will need either a wrench, which is a real pain, or a nice flexible socket like one of these, or one like one of these here. Alright, so now I got to get the push rods out. So I get the gasket off. Usually you have to unbolt all these rockers to get the push rods out. But I've done this a few times, so I went and purchased this handy tool here. It's a snap-on tool, Blue Point. If you can see a part number on there at all. If you're doing more than one of these, it's a good idea to pick it up. It makes life a lot easier. You can see on these intake gaskets here that they're about to cause me some issues. I'm starting to build up with some coolant jelly there. You can see this one here is already split. Looks like we caught it just before it started leaking, which is good. Alright, I got my intake manifold gasket set here. I picked this up off Amazon. It's cheaper than I could get it from our parts suppliers, unfortunately. So, let's box it here. These are the best intake gaskets you can get for these things. Show you. So these are the newest updated gaskets you can get pretty much. They are steel with a rubber insert in them. They also have these little tabs here. Those are the anti-crush tabs. So when you torque the intake, you're not crushing the gasket out. So I'll show you what you want to avoid. These are the old style ones. This is basically the same as what I had on the car. It's just an old Napa gasket from about 15 years ago. And those are the ones you want to avoid. If you look at this one here, this is the one that came off the car. They have been updated compared to these ones. These ones don't have any crush tabs in them. These ones do. I also updated them more, I see, and put a couple in the center. So the only problem with the plastic is it still eventually eats away and stuff like that happens there. A lot of people tend to mix up the push rods on these engines. It's fairly simple. You don't want to mix them up or else you'll end up with bent valves. I've seen people do it before. So the best way when I do them basically is you just have to remember that the long one goes to the exhaust valve. So this is the exhaust valve down here. Intake, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust. You can see it's closest to the outside of the head, the rocker. So I want to see when you line them up. These are intakes, and that one's an exhaust. Alright, I finally got this thing back together. Now I just gotta fire it up and see if it actually runs. I did have some issues when I was putting this thing back together with the intake. Being that the lower intake's a little different, I did have to do a little bit of grinding on that bracket for the fuel rail and a little more on the intake. It's just with the way the injector sit in this intake and whatnot, it was off a little, so just a little more grinding, and managed to get her bolted back on.